On March 3, 1918, Russia officially exits World War I. But why did Russia leave the war? And what were the short and long-term consequences of its exit? Also, why did Russia's February and October revolutions actually happen in March and November? An alliance with Serbia pulled Russia into World War I in 1914. Things did not go well for Russia from the outset. Despite the fact that Germany was forced to divide its forces between the Western and Eastern fronts, Russia's military was pushed back. The Russians did find some success against Germany's Central Powers allies, but this could not overcome the disastrous defeats to the Germans. The army's struggles fueled growing discontent among the Russian people, especially the poverty-stricken workers and peasants. Hostility toward Tsar Nicholas II and his imperial regime grew. The February Revolution in March 1917 forced the Tsar to abdicate the throne. Vladimir Lenin and the communist Bolsheviks then seized power from the provisional government during the October Revolution in November, and went on to establish the Soviet Union. One of Lenin's first actions as leader was to end Russia's participation in the war. A formal ceasefire was declared in December, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk formalized the peace in March 1918. Russia's exit had serious consequences. In the short term, it helped push the US into the war. It had become apparent by early 1917 that Russia was in trouble. It was difficult to fight a war against the Central Powers while a revolution was taking place inside its own borders. The US could see that Russia was likely to pull out due to the revolution. And even if it didn't, it was clear that Russia would not be much of a factor in the war going forward. This meant that Germany would move many of its forces on the Eastern Front to the Western Front, which could break the trench warfare stalemate. Even though the US was neutral, Americans clearly wanted the Allies to win. The Russian Revolution wasn't the only thing that pushed the US into the war, however. There were other contributing factors like the Zimmermann telegram and unrestricted submarine warfare. Russia's exit also had long-term consequences. First, Russia gave up huge tracts of land in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. In the years between the wars, the Soviet Union regained some of those losses, like Ukraine and Belarus. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, however, saw World War II as an opportunity to reacquire territory lost in World War I, like the Baltic states and Poland. Another long-term consequence of Russia's World War I exit is the current Russia-Ukraine war. Russia gave up Ukraine in 1918, only to reacquire it between the world wars. Then Russia lost Ukraine again at the end of the Cold War in 1991. Russian President Vladimir Putin certainly sees Ukraine as historically Russian and is seeking to take it again, just like the Bolsheviks did after World War I, which, if you ask me, is total Bolshevik. So why do they call them the February and October revolutions if they happened in March and November? Well, another of Lenin's early actions was to switch from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. The switch happened when Russia skipped the 1st through the 13th of February in 1918. Yes, that means that if you went to bed in Moscow on January 31st, 1918, you would wake up the next morning on February 14th. This must have been a real challenge for Russian husbands and boyfriends when it comes to Valentine's Day shopping. The rest of Europe and its dominions had made the switch much earlier. Catholic nations like Italy, France, Spain, and others switched in 1582 during the days of Pope Gregory XIII, the Gregorian calendar's namesake. Elizabethan England didn't want to support what they considered a Catholic plot, so Britain and its colonies didn't switch until 170 years later in 1752, skipping the 3rd through the 13th of September. So, the 1917 revolutions happened in February and October on the old Julian calendar, but they happened in March and November according to the Gregorian calendar, which, as mentioned, most of the world was already using in 1917, and Russia began using the following year. But why did we need the Gregorian calendar in the first place? Simply put, the Julian calendar, named for Julius Caesar, was inaccurate. It calculated one year as 365.25 days. Thus, you would need a leap day once every 4 years. The easiest way to do this would be to add a leap year in every year divisible by 4. The problem is that astronomers later discovered that the actual year length is closer to 365.2422 days. This means that the Julian calendar had about 3 extra leap days every 400 years. It may not seem like much, but this put 16th century Europe 10 days behind a true tropical calendar, necessitating the change. If we still used the Julian calendar today, we'd be 13 days behind the tropical calendar. The equinoxes and solstices that mark the beginnings of each season would not fall around the 21st of March, June, September, and December. They would instead begin around the 8th of those months. 1100 years from now, they wouldn't begin in those months at all. To account for this, the Gregorian calendar makes 3 of every 4 years ending in 00 regular years, not leap years. This means that with the Gregorian calendar, the years 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not leap years. It also means that 2100, 2200, and 2300 will not be leap years either. A 00 year must be divisible by 400 to be a leap year. So, 1600, 2000, and 2400 are leap years. And if this all seems confusing, don't worry about it. Most of you watching this video won't still be alive in the year 2100 anyway. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 1706, German composer Johann Pachelbel, famous for his Canon in D, dies in Nuremberg. In 1845, for the first time in history, the US Congress overrides a presidential veto. In 1865, Lincoln creates the Freedmen's Bureau to help blacks transition from slavery to freedom. In 1875, the first ever indoor game of ice hockey is held at a skating rink in Montreal, Canada. In 1978, Van Halen begins its first world tour, opening for Journey at the American Ballroom in Chicago. In 1991, Los Angeles police officers brutally beat Rodney King, leading to 1992 riots. In 2024, Iowa's Caitlin Clark becomes the all-time career scorer in women's or men's NCAA basketball. And now it's time for our Today in History quiz. What was U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt's relationship to U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt? Grandson? Nephew? Second cousin? Or fifth cousin? Liked learning about Russia's exit from World War I? Then you'll love this one about the armistice that ends the fighting in the war. Tap the screen to keep the story going on Today in History.